Well, welcome. Thank you for joining our class today.
Thanks for having me. Good to see you. Good to see everyone.
Yeah, so Professor Christoph Treude is a professor at the University of Adelaide in Australia, and it's actually Saturday morning for Christoph. And Christoph has a long history of using qualitative methods in empirical software engineering and using quantitative methods. He is, the full deal. He uses all of the methods, studying topics, such as collaboration, and also a lot recently on documentation and use of different communication channels. And yeah, so and you've been doing a lot of work on coding in qualitative methods. So I thought of you for this workshop because not only are you interested in communication and you've done some analysis, for example, of Stack Overflow, you could come and we could have fun and make this a little bit interactive. So thank you for being here. Christoph also was at the University of Victoria. The class are already long onto me by now. They know that I've invited all of my friends to be visitors in the class. And so, yeah, thanks for coming, Christoph. So I'm going to hand it over to you. The class
Sounds
did
good.
do the homework, and Omar has been collecting that. So take it away, and I'll give you the floor and let you share. Do you need to share anything?
Yeah, I will share my screen, I think.
All right.
If that's okay with everyone.
Yep, there you go. You have permission.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Nice to be back at UVic after 8 years.
Oh, wow. Time goes quickly.
Does, yeah. Okay, let's see if the screen sharing works. I'm hoping you can all see my screen now. Make this full screen. Okay, people can see my screen? Okay, I'm getting a few thumbs up, good. So I just wanted to go through a couple of slides before we go into the interactive activities. And I want to start just with a very quick disclaimer that I know you've had some guest lectures on qualitative research methods already, for example, from Rashina, who lives almost around the corner here by Australian standards. I'm not going to be talking about grounded theory today because I know she already did that a few weeks ago. The kind of qualitative analysis that I'd like to talk about today and that we'll practice a little bit in the interactive activity is more focused on what's often done in mining software repositories research, where we have some kind of textual artifacts, for example, commit messages or documentation, Stack Overflow questions, something like that. And we just try to understand what they are about. So you might remember from Rashina's guest lecture on grounded theory that in grounded theory, data collection and data analysis are really intermingled and you sort of go back and forth. And what we're doing today, we're using sort of a different approach. We assume that we already have the data. We just want to answer some qualitative research questions. And I think on the next slide, I have a few examples where I've used this kind of methodology myself. So we had a paper last year, I think, on just trying to understand what is in GitHub README files. So we had some sampling strategy to find some GitHub README files, and then we wanted to understand what's actually in them. I don't know if you've had any guest lectures that talk about text analysis, but something that could be used there would be like topic modeling, but we all know that topic modeling isn't actually that good and it's really difficult to interpret. So something like qualitative data analysis, like just looking at lots of README files and writing down what we see seemed like the more appropriate methodology. The problem often with this kind of research is if I just look at 10 README files and you look at 10 README files, we probably come up with very different conclusions what README files are really about. The same thing applies to any of the other data that I mentioned on the slides there. So, for example, if I look at 10 questions on Stack Overflow, you look at 10 questions, even if they are the same questions, we might still come to different conclusions what they might be about, what kind of questions they are. I mean, sure, we might agree what programming language they are about, but it might be much harder to agree on what kind of question is it? Is it a how-to question? Is it a conceptual question? Was it actually satisfactorily answered? And so on. Okay, so qualitative data analysis, and that's what we'll do today, is an iterative process where we sort of go back and forth between individual and group level activity. that also implies that the kind of qualitative data analysis that we do talk about today isn't really something you can do by yourself. At some point, somebody else will need to be involved. Um, Thank you for doing the homework already. So you've done already part of the individual activity. And what we'll do in a couple of minutes is to move to the first iteration of the group level activity. Right, so this might be something that you've kind of already done as part of the homework. Let me just move this Zoom window out of the screen here. So qualitative coding usually is a couple of steps, assigning codes and labels to pieces of data. In the case of the homework, those were the Stack Overflow edit messages, but could be anything else. Could also be in other domains, doesn't have to be software engineering. And the code or label is typically a word or a very short phrase that represents the essence or key attribute of a piece of data. And what you're trying to do when you do this is to organize the data into chunks that are alike. So for example, grouping all Stack Overflow how-to questions, or grouping all questions about homework, or grouping all questions that seem conceptual. Okay. So yeah, so you assign codes to data, and then these codes basically become your coding structure. So for example, what we found when we annotated README files or sections of README files, there was some kinds of sections that were talking about what is a project, other sections about how to use a project, other sections about what are references to other web resources about the project, and so on. And sort of the compilation of all this codes is known as the coding structure, compilation of the emerging codes. Ideally, at least in later stages of the coding, they will have some brief definition or properties or even examples associated to them. It's often something that comes a bit later, provides guidance for when and how to use the codes, and they typically evolve throughout the analysis. And I hope we have enough time to see a bit of this evolution in our activity today. Um, just want to very briefly go through this. So there are different kinds of coding, and it basically depends on whether you already have codes when you start. What we'll do today fits into the left bucket there. So inductive, just from the ground up. We assume that we don't have a set of codes when we start, because I'm assuming this is what you did for your homework as well. You just looked at 10 or 20 edit messages on Stack Overflow and just made up codes. You didn't look at related work, or maybe some of you did, but it wasn't part of the homework description to look at related work and find existing categorizations that maybe you could adopt to this. This is something that can also be done. So then you would be talking about seed categories. And of course, you can do something in the middle where you use some seed categories and some completely new things. And I think this is the last slide before we actually start with the categorization. So a good coding schema should be exhaustive, which basically means it can cover everything in the data. Sometimes the way around this is just to have one category that says other for everything that you were not able to categorize. Should be mutually exclusive, so things shouldn't fit into more than one bucket ideally. Should be parsimonious, which I learned recently means the simplest explanation that can explain the data, but not simpler than that. So it shouldn't be overly complicated, not unnecessarily complicated. It would be nice if things are logically connected somehow. So with software engineering data, for example, sometimes it can make sense to code things along the different steps of the waterfall model, for example. So maybe some things are related to requirements, others are related to design, others are related to implementation. You see there's a bit of a logical connection between these labels. That's a nice to have. It's not always possible. Should be or can be mapped to something existing, such as the phases of the waterfall model or related work. And finally, it should be useful. Useful, of course, as you can imagine, depends on what exactly it is that you're trying to do. So that's often much harder to figure out whether it's useful or not. I think these were all the slides that I wanted to show at the beginning. So what I was hoping to do was that now we could go very briefly through your homework, and without looking at specific Stack Overflow edit messages, I was hoping we could just start writing up an initial version of the code book. And I don't think we need to write up definitions specifically yet of what these different codes mean, but just have a list of the different codes that people came up with. So feel free to unmute yourself, or maybe I should open the chat window as well in case people prefer the chat. Let me do this. Okay. So, what kind of codes did you use? Who wants to start? You can just call out one. I'll take notes, and I'm hoping you can still see my screen. Grammar and formatting. Okay. Should we make this? For now, I'll make these two different codes. Let me make this a bit bigger so you can actually see. How do I make this bigger? Come on. Okay.
Thanks
Getting a
for
few more
jumping
through
in
the
the
chat
chat.
here.
And also feel free to shout out too.
Code refactor, sorry. Refactor.
Oh, they're coming fast and furious now.
Yeah.
Oh, you can copy paste maybe.
Purpose. Ah, this is good. They are along different dimensions, I can already tell.
Cool.
Very good.
Yeah, I had a couple of questions. How should we code? And I'm like,
I guess there's different different approaches to that really. I'm gonna start from the bottom now because that's what my chat window shows me. Replacements,
yeah,
readability, searchability.
this is cool seeing it come in the
Yeah.
chat actually.
I mean, we could probably have given more guidance at the beginning, but in my experience, at least, that doesn't necessarily help. It's
Yeah,
actually this is actually one thing we found in many projects that if we give too much guidance, then people don't have the freedom to come up with new stuff. Whereas in this case, because I
yeah,
assume everybody went in without a preconceived notion of what we were looking for. Um, we have a lot more freedom here and can then decide what to focus on.
nice. These
Answer,
are some nice codes coming here.
data tags. Okay, I'm pretty sure I'm missing about half of them now. Question clarification. Let me move the Zoom window out of the way again. Improved answer. Syntax we already had. Configuration change. Okay. Mistagged. And something about references. Okay, maybe I'll stop there for now. Um, so what we will do next is we'll look at some Stack Overflow edit messages that I'm assuming you haven't looked at. So I think you were asked to do the first 10 or 20. So we'll start basically in row 21 after this. And we'll use Mentimeter to see if we can actually reach any agreement based on the codes that we have so far. I think before we do that, I just want to give you the opportunity to see if we want to merge any of these. So based on, I think we have 22 now, and I apologize if I missed any that came up in the chat. I tried to keep up. Are there any that you think obviously look like they should be merged based on what we see so far? In my experience, having 22 is probably too many. We will want to merge some. I'm also happy to do a Mentimeter with 22 options if we can't agree. But if there is anything that you think can be merged based on looking at this list, then now would probably be a good time to start doing that. So we have slightly fewer options in Mentimeter.
They actually look quite different, don't they? Formatting and syntax, no.
Yeah, tagging and mistagged. I had thought that as well. So
There's also improved answer and updated answer somewhere.
okay, so
Answer
maybe
update.
we'll obviously we can always go back and you know, undo these sorts of things. Completeness improved. Thanks for all the input here. This is fantastic.
Yeah.
Um,
Have you done this using a chat like this before?
I don't think I have. No,
It's actually kind of nice.
no, it is. Code refactor and design change. Where's the design change? Oh, design fix, I guess. Yeah, okay. Completeness answer, improved answer. Completeness. Where did the improved answer go? Oh, here. Maybe
Wow.
I'll change this to
Great.
complete.
Oh, yeah.
So this goes.
I think they've
Uh,
done this before.
documentation and references. Okay, interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, documentation.
Sweet.
Readability and understandability. Okay. Where did the readability go? There. So maybe we'll put grammar into this. Okay, the readability and formatting. Could try to put formatting there. Do something. Okay, I'm just gonna, yeah, so tagging can include removing. Did I miss any? Does anybody feel like I didn't follow up on their change request? Sorry, it's a small chat window and lots of messages.
Anything missing, folks?
Still two understandabilities, thank you. Where's, where's the, oh there, yeah, okay, so this one can go, thanks. Okay, well maybe we'll wrap this up at this point. Let me just, just all my Zoom windows are in the way. Okay, so we'll use this as a starting point. Let me copy this into Mentimeter. So let's go back to the Stack Overflow edits. My understanding is you did the first 10 or 20, so let's not look at those again. We'll start with row 21. And what I'd like you to do now, in case you haven't guessed this yet, is to go to Mentimeter, and I should actually hide the, how can I hide this? I don't want you to see the results yet. Um,
You can share, you can just share one window in Zoom, like not the whole screen.
yeah,
If you
might
if
have
you
to
stop sharing and then
update this.
select again.
Alternatively, I could just copy over the number. Can somebody just put the number in the chat maybe?
Yeah, it's
So
there.
it's,
Tyler already did it.
okay, thank you.
Thank you,
And
Tyler.
we'll just go to a different screen then. Okay, so what I'd like you to do is just do the coding using Mentimeter for this thing we have in row 21 here, which says rename question to make it more relevant for future users. Given that you've all used Mentimeter before, I'm assuming I don't have to give you a lot of time to do this. Maybe I'll do a few more seconds. Okay, ready to look at results? See, that's what I was hoping for, to show you that this kind of qualitative coding is actually hard. So despite, what on paper looked like a fairly reasonable coding schema, one that in this case, we agreed on with like how many people do we have in the room? Like 30 or so. There seems to be not necessarily the highest agreement on all these different things. So we have at least 3 here that seem to do really well. Correction, fix, improved, update, complete answer, question, clarification, readability, understandability, grammar, formatting, replacement, searchability, and what's the last one there? Oh, I don't know what the last one is. Did we have an empty one in Mentimeter? Sorry, I may have used Mentimeter wrong. May have added an empty answer option. Any thoughts about how we should change the coding guide to make sure that we have better agreement than this? Because in an ideal world, we would all have agreed on one option in this case, and we obviously didn't. Anything, we have 3 options that seem to not be mutually exclusive at all. So maybe I'll just bring the coding guide back. There's the coding guide. Did anybody have any thoughts about how we might want to adjust the coding guide to help with this?
There are probably a couple ways of doing it. One way is first to have clear boundaries on what it means, like the definitions for each code, so that everybody has a good understanding of what each code represents. And then the other strategy would be for people to talk about why they chose what they chose. And again, that's just to ensure that everyone has the shared understanding of the contextual factors that may influence picking one code over another code.
So yeah, I definitely agree with those 2 options. So we can definitely, we could definitely, if we had a lot of time left, try to write down exact definitions of what we mean by these. And the way to get there would basically be to discuss. But in this concrete example, were there specific things about maybe about those 3 codes that many of you chose that made it hard to choose one of these? So based on my experience, we're not quite there yet where we want to write down definitions of the codes, because I don't think this is going to be our final list of codes yet. Okay, so Matthew's saying that clarification and readability are similar. Any idea how we could fix this in the coding schema?
I kind of want to change up improve and update, because then it overlays with what you're updating it for. You could improve the readability. Then you get 2 tags and it says the same thing.
Yeah, that's a very good point, Derek. So I think in this case, what happened, and that's perfectly normal when you do this kind of coding, is that the coding, the codes are, or some of the codes at least, are orthogonal to each other. So we can have, like you said, improving, but what are we improving? The learnability, and maybe there's a purpose associated with this improvement. So maybe all of these could somehow fit in some cases, right? Or we update the tagging for some sort of purpose and so on. So in this case, what could we do? So I would actually say that this one, probably partly because of the merging that we did at the beginning, has become a bit too generic. So improved, update, and complete answer, assuming that all the Stack Overflow edits are somehow related to improving or updating something that's already there. Maybe that one has become a bit too generic. So maybe we'll just remove the improved and update here and leave it as complete, because that seems to be its own thing. So if something is incomplete, maybe we want to complete it. Any other searchability fits with tagging? Maybe. Does everybody agree that maybe searchability fits with tagging? And we can just make this change for now. So tags are used for searching. Yes, that's right. So searchability. Okay, do you think this is already enough to make the next round of coding more successful? Maybe we should, yeah.
Another possible reason why we didn't agree on a label is that that particular sample was outside of what we'd seen before. So
Possibly,
it wasn't a good label for it.
Let me just look at
that
it
one's
again.
kind of expanding the scope of the question, right?
Mm-hmm. Based on that observation, do you have a suggestion for what a good new code for this could be? Sorry to pick on you.
Expanding question scope.
Okay. We also have standardization in the chat. Yeah, so I guess we have a bit of overlap now between clarification and some of the other ones. Oh, this is fun. Question, clarification, understandability.
Yeah, it's super fun.
So I guess at least two of the dimensions that I see in there now, we have what kind of change was made and why that change was made. So learnability, for example, would probably be a reason to make a change, whereas references documentation, for example, would be what kind of change was made. So when this kind of thing happens, one thing that we could try going forward is actually to break this up into two questions. What kind of change was made and why was it made? And maybe we'll have two different coding schemas for that. I'm not sure the remaining, how much time do we have left, Peggy? Like 18 minutes or so.
Yeah,
Probably
I
not.
mean, some stay a little later. So, you know,
Right.
but at 4:20, anybody who would like to go can go.
I see.
Yeah, we often, actually a bunch often stick around and we just chit chat. So, you know, going a few
Right.
minutes later is okay.
Right. But yeah, maybe we don't want to break up this one question into two questions for now. What we could do is just focus on one aspect for now. Okay, Ansh is not staying later. More important things.
Oh, nice.
So what we could do is maybe just focus on one kind of change, or one kind of question. So maybe we want to only focus on what changed or only focus on why it changed. Which one do we think is more interesting? Do we want to focus on, because that's at least what I'm starting to see here. So we have two different questions. What was changed? Why was it changed? Pretty sure the why is probably the more interesting one. For the what, this is probably something that we could, so if our research question is what changes during Stack Overflow edits, there would probably even be more appropriate means than qualitative data analysis to answer this. So you could write, for example, a bunch of regular expressions that check whether the code was changed, or in this case, whether it's a question or an answer. That one's fairly easy. If existing words were changed, whether new words were added, that sort of thing. So this is the kind of thing where I would even argue that maybe qualitative data analysis is good to get an initial insight, but maybe not to actually answer that kind of research question. So maybe we'll focus on why was it changed. So some of them can definitely stay. Purpose is probably too generic because it would then apply to everything. Note that this doesn't mean that purpose was wrong at the beginning, because we didn't really know that we had these two dimensions to deal with yet. And actually we might in the end deal with more than just two dimensions. Who knows, there might be more hidden in there. So I would argue that this one can probably stay as well. Readability, understandability, grammar. Searchability is definitely why was it changed. Standardization, this one should
Yeah.
fit. Clarification seems good as a reason. Complete, I'm just gonna rename this into completeness. Correction, fix, that's sort of good in terms of, you know, if maybe somebody fixed something that was actually wrong. So just maybe the way it was before was good. Refactoring is probably good. Actually, we're keeping a lot of them. So syntax I would probably remove for this kind of question now. Replacement I would probably remove because, again, sort of the fact that there was a replacement is something that we could probably build a little, write a little script for that can tell us that, you know, it wasn't just adding new characters, it was replacing existing ones. And I think where we're moving now is we're more interested in why something was changed. Maybe we'll get rid of this one too, and this one, and then we'll see how that goes in another round. You also get a feeling for how long this kind of coding can take. As you can tell, I'm playing a little bit of dictator here and actually making some decisions for the team, just because we don't have time. Just because we won't have time to listen to everybody right now. How do I do a new question? Let me move all of this out of the way. Can I easily delete the existing ones? Does anybody know how to delete the existing options?
Yeah, I don't. Not without hitting
New
XXX.
slide.
Oh, maybe if you
Add new
change the
slide.
question
Good.
type.
Yeah, adding a new slide was a, oops, that's not what I want to click on. Okay,
I think,
so
yeah.
should be the same number, but the next slide, right? So yeah, there was an X, but I think I needed to click each one of them separately. Okay, so it's the same Mentimeter number, but slide 2.
Okay.
And the one that we should annotate next is this one in row 22. Added alias declarations. Now the example is complete. Oh, look, there's a keyword. Second, this shows a join aliases shortcoming. So I'll just give you a couple seconds again. I think one of the messages that I'm hoping you can take away from this little session here is that you know, this is difficult. If you read a research paper, and unfortunately I've read too many of those, where it just says, oh, we looked at 100 Stack Overflow threads and we found that about half of them are about fixing bugs. That's not enough, right? That's not a research result. This might be good for, you know, some anecdotal thing, but you know, to decide that half of Stack Overflow questions are about fixing bugs in code, we need something a bit more thorough. And I think we're starting to do something a little bit more thorough here. And as you can already tell, different people have very different opinions about, you know, what exactly is in these Stack Overflow edit messages, and it would probably take us a few hours, possibly even a few sessions over a couple of days in my experience, to come up with a coding schema that actually works and where we will actually reach good agreement across different codes. We don't have that much time today, so let's see what, okay, good. So this one worked pretty well. Let me move myself out of the way there. Okay, nothing on that side. So in this case, the completeness keyword worked nicely in our favor. So we have a lot of completeness there, some code refactor design. I think design was also mentioned in the message, right? Clarification, readability. Good. Should we do one more message then that maybe doesn't have the completeness word, keyword, or any other in there? Okay, again, I might need some Mentimeter help here. How do I just reset this? I think there was a reset somewhere, right?
I think you could delete the slide and start again too, right?
Okay, I think there's even reset results. Yes, this slide. Aha, okay, good. So let's do this one then. Let me move all the other windows out of the way. Less reading and fixed mistake where echo XML instead of X. Okay, don't ask me what less reading means in this context. I don't know. That's also fun when you do qualitative data analysis. Sometimes it's impossible to understand what these people want.
You remember the Polish one?
Yes, I do. That's a nice anecdote. So yeah, maybe we can just tell this story while people annotate the one in row 23 there. So this was way too many years ago now. Peggy and I were working with IBM in Ottawa, and we were analyzing the tags that they had associated with their work items, or on GitHub they would be called issues. This was a very new feature at the time, so we had no idea how it would be used. So, you know, the natural thing was to look at the tags that were used most often to get an initial understanding of what was happening. And turns out that I think it was actually the most used tag, or at least in the top 3. It was Polish.
Polish,
like, well, it's like, okay, why not? I mean,
are they translating it to Polish?
The product that they were working on had internationalization, so maybe there had just been particular issues related to the Polish version. It seemed a bit odd, but you know, the tag was there like hundreds of times. Of course, it was Polish, not Polish, spelled exactly the same, which just meant that you know, at the end of a sprint, they would only work on polishing the product rather than making any breaking changes. So that was Polish instead of Polish.
This was an example of where you and I agreed, right?
Yeah.
That it was Polish, but we were both wrong.
We agreed on the wrong thing, exactly. Exactly. So I'm assuming other guest lectures will have talked about this already, but in many cases, you know, just looking at one single data source is not enough to get a good understanding. So if we really wanted to know how Stack Overflow posts evolve through edits, probably a good idea to talk to some people who make these edits as well. And there might be even other things to do as well. Oh, Polish notation, that would have been a good guess as well. Yeah. But yeah, just looking at single words and trying to code them, not that easy. Okay, let's look at the results here. Okay, we have 2 that are in the running. Correction fix or readability fix. I guess we have fix in there a few too many times now. Yeah, so that's a good question. What if the edit does multiple things, multiple tags? That's definitely one way you can go. A problem with that can be that in the end, you just end up assigning every tag to every data item. So to the extent possible in projects that I'm involved in, we try to avoid that just because otherwise it becomes really messy. It also becomes more difficult to calculate inter-rater agreement. Because we won't have time to go through inter-rater agreement today, unfortunately, but
Yeah.
we could, there are formulas out there for calculating how good our agreement in this case, for example, would be. And some kappa value, and in this case it would probably be around 0.3 or 0.4 if I had to guess. Anything below 0.6 is probably going to be difficult to publish. If your goal is to make sure that there's as much agreement as possible among everybody in the room, and you allow for multiple codes, the solution unfortunately often means that you just end up tagging everything with everything, because that's the best way of reaching agreement, right? Everything that could possibly be relevant, well, we'll just assign it unless it's really obviously not related at all. So that can be an issue. What I would prefer in this case is actually what we kind of tried to do already earlier, to try to break the question into multiple sub-questions, basically. So when we started, we just tried to code the messages we saw. Then we started to understand that, okay, maybe there's what was changed and why it was changed in there. There's probably more in there that we didn't even look at yet, but that can often be the cleaner solution. Another thing that we have done in some related papers, actually our well-cited Stack Overflow paper, Peggy, I think, does that. We have one category in there that actually is the combination of two codes, because we observed that in quite a few cases, so we had a coding schema like this, but we observed that there were a lot of cases where two of them applied. So we actually added a new category that was just a combination of these two things. So that could be a solution as well. To the extent possible, I would try to avoid multiple codes, because it can get really messy and you end up with just everybody coding everything with every label. It's not always possible. But even in cases where it's not impossible, I would still try to label things only with a minimum number of labels that you think you can get away with. Okay, so here we have correction, fix, and readability, understandability, grammar, formatting. Okay, and Matthew thinks we should get rid of refactoring. Can we keep design change though? Design change could be a purpose, right? See Matthew nodding. So the two that, let me just unbold this. Readability and correction. These were the two that got a lot of votes on this last one, and it was fixed mistake, right? So in this case, it might actually make sense to write up a little rule and say that what could it be? Again, I'm being the dictator here and just making these decisions. In an ideal world with more time, we would discuss these. But a rule that we could use for this, and that I have used in similar projects in the past, would be if there's, if the, how should we write this? If the edit is fixing something that was wrong before. So in this case, wrong means it was actually incorrect. Maybe I should use that word. Incorrect before I use this label. So this would basically now tell us, and obviously this is something that everybody who annotates would need to discuss, and we would have to reach an agreement on whether we want to use this. But this is the kind of rule that I have used in similar projects in the past, where which would just say, okay, this, if something that was wrong was actually fixed in this case, then we use this label no matter what else happened, because we think that fixing something that was wrong is, in our understanding, more important than just improving the readability or grammar. Obviously, depending on what our research goal is, this might be the completely wrong thing to do, and we should have done the opposite. Use correction fix only if the fix was the only thing that happened. That could also be a rule. But the reason I just typed it up was just to show you this is the kind of rule that we could we could come up with to hope to get some more agreement in the next round. Because we're running out of time, I just wanted to show the last couple of slides I had as well, because I think there were some good things on there. Just, okay, I'll minimize the chat window so I won't see chat messages anymore. Let me move myself over here. So one thing that I wanted to mention, and unfortunately a lot of research papers don't do this well, is no matter what process we use, make sure to describe that process. And it's basic things like who did the coding. You wouldn't believe how many papers we review or even that get published where it just says, oh, the data was coded and, we found 80% of GitHub issues are bug fixes. Like, well, who was involved, and in particular, how many people were involved? Is this, one student looking at 10 items, or is it a team of 30 like we have today looking at 3 items, or how was this done? There's not necessarily a right answer to any of these questions. For who did the coding, I would argue it should at least be more than one person. For many of the other things, there's not necessarily a right answer, but it needs to be reported. It needs to be reported what was done. Was coding done separately? So the way you did the homework, I'm assuming most of you did that separately, or did we all just get together in a Zoom session and discuss every item and come up with an agreement, which might also be a valid way of doing this. Where did the codes come from? Did we make them up based on the data, or did you use some existing coding schema from related work? Did we measure agreement somehow? Today we didn't have time to do that, but I mentioned kappa agreement briefly. When there were disagreements, how were those resolved? So actually, sometimes I find that papers report that they had 70% agreement or 0.7 kappa agreement, but then it still leaves the question, okay, in the other cases, which label did you go with in the end? Just like maybe the most senior person in the room made the call, or
or the loudest voice.
Exactly. It needs to be described, right? So, and maybe in some cases you can't really come to an agreement unless you listen to the loudest voice. So I'm not even saying that's the worst thing to do. It's probably not the best, but I think when I read the results of qualitative data analysis like this, I want to know what was done, and then as a reader or reviewer, I can decide whether that's appropriate methodology. But if it's not described, then we don't know what this is. I just want to mention again, I think I mentioned this at the beginning, so there can be other purpose.
Just going back to that last one, I mean, I think a lot of people are also pushing to have some data, right? Like anonymized data or a coding book, or even some examples, right? To sort of increase, the faith that the reader has. If the data can't be provided, at least a coding book, or like you have in your spreadsheet, right?
Yeah, that's a very good point. Actually, that should be on that slide. Very good point. So yeah, I wouldn't see, if we do this kind of analysis that we did today, I don't see any reason why you wouldn't publish the code book at least.
Yeah.
The list of the codes and the definitions. I mean, we didn't really write up definitions today, but you can see that we would eventually have gotten there. Exactly. Yeah. Possibly even make the coded data available if it was public data to begin with. Yeah, definitely. Very good point. Yeah, just want to say again, so there are other purposes of coding, for example, grounded theory, where we probably wouldn't have followed this process. We would have collected some data, analyzed it, maybe refined our questions, refined our research goals, collected more data, where the output is really a theory and not a categorization of the data. So today our end goal sort of looked like categorization of the data. That's not the end goal of all research. I've been pushing a little bit towards things like kappa agreement or any sort of quantitative measure of agreement today. That's also not the only way to ensure quality in qualitative research. So you might already have learned about triangulation, member checking, that sort of thing in other lectures.
Like the
And
Polish example.
right, exactly, exactly. And here's a picture of Peggy. Can you see her down there in front of Andy Marcus?
Yeah.
So this was a shorter version of a qualitative data analysis
Aw.
tutorial I've given before, and there were a bunch of people involved in helping put this together, and they are on the slide, and they included Peggy.
Aw. Thank you, Christoph. That was great. That was so helpful. You know, I don't know why I didn't really put 2 and 2 together on what we did last week. So last week for our first project, we applied, I don't know if you've seen the paper, the Who, What, How framework. It's similar to the talk I gave at
Yes.
last year. And so we actually, as a project, we applied that to pretty much all of the papers at PIXI 2020.
Mm-hmm.
And the participants in the course, they separately coded them according to Who, What, How, plus a few other questions. And then last week we did an alignment activity. And so we should go ahead. Omar and I are still looking at that, but we should go ahead and sort of calculate the Cohen's kappa to see, you know, what that looks like, right, in terms of the alignment. So I can talk about that next week. Cool. Is there a particular calculator that you use online, or we already have that, says Omer. You already calculated it. Yeah, fairly low, I think, wasn't it, for some of the questions?
Yeah,
the one that I had.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Christoph.
I was just going to say the one that I had open in a tab already, if it had time for this today, was the one that I just, now I sent it to you only, sorry. I meant to send it to everyone. Here we go.
Yeah, we can throw it in the chat. Thank you. Yeah, there's a few online. So this is, yeah.
There are a few of them. This one's kind of nice because it allows you to go really high in terms of the number of raters. So often this kind of work is done just with 2 annotators, and some of the kappa calculators will only allow you to do 2.
Okay.
This one, I think you can go, I don't even know if there's a limit, but you can go pretty high.
Fantastic.
Obviously, if you do this in a systematic way, it'd probably be better to have a script that, you know, for repeatability and so on, that you can publish as well. But just to get a quick idea of what the kappa value is, I've used this one before and it seems to work reasonably well.
Yeah, you could throw it in your spreadsheet, right, which you then share, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, Christoph, before the rest of the students go out, just want to say thank you to you for this. This was really, really good. I'm kind of wishing we had done this before Project One alignment, but you know, I didn't think of that. That's the problem when you teach a course for the first time. You only sort of spot the problems as you're going. But I think, you know, maybe it's good. Maybe it's good to suffer. You know, we suffered last week probably doing alignment, right? And then to see, oh, okay, this is how we could have done it better, right? This was great. Thank you so much for joining us all the way from Australia. Thank you.
Oh, thanks for having me.